Start again. Good morning. Welcome to Governance Audit Committee here at Elizabeth House. And I'd just like to say a couple of introductions. As usual, a very warm welcome to David Fowler, who's our independent person who joins us, and a warm welcome to Terry Jeremy, Councillor Terry Jeremy, who is subbing for Councillor Harry Clark. Welcome. Okay, right. So if we could start with item 1, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of February 2022. Are members of the committee happy to agree that they're a true and accurate record?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I chair that meeting and I'm happy with the minutes. Thank you.
So, members, are you happy for me to sign that as a true and accurate record? I have no actions arising from that meeting. So that takes us to item 3, apologies.
Thank you, Chairman. I have apologies from Councillor Clark, Councillor Hambidge and Councillor Monument, and Councillor Jeremy is in attendance as Councillor Clark's substitute.
Thank you. And I understand that Councillor Monument has got COVID, so I hope she's okay. So item 4 on our agendas is urgent business, and I have none. So we'll go to item 5, declarations of interest. Do any of the members have any declarations of interest that they wish to declare? It's not previously on their register of interests. No, lovely, thank you. So we have 2 non-members of the committee here. You're very welcome, gentlemen. And obviously, if you indicate to speak in the normal way, we'll take your input. So that takes us on to item 7, which is the Q1 risk report. And we have Cabinet Member Councillor Jane James to introduce the item. Welcome, Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm delighted to bring the Q1 risk report to the committee today. Currently, the Council has 11 strategic risks. This is a reduction of 2 compared to when the committee last looked at these back in February. Ryan will go over the specifics in a second on these risks, but I'd just like to comment on the cybersecurity risk first. As you'll appreciate, cybersecurity is a significant risk not only to the Council but to the residents of Breckland. Councils up and down the country are continually targeted by cyber criminals, both domestically and internationally, due to the data that they are entrusted with by our residents. A pillar of good cybersecurity is ensuring that everyone can spot the signs of attacks, something which is covered in our cybersecurity training, which is available for all officers and members. I'd therefore like to take this opportunity, if I may, to remind members to complete this training if you haven't already done so, as it is a crucial control in how we prevent our systems from being infiltrated. The risk register is next due to be seen by yourselves in September after today, and I'll now pass over to Ryan to cover some of the more specific points. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'm going to go over some of the changes that we've had on the risk register and some of the additions. So notably, we've got rid of 3 risks since it last came in February, and we've added in some. 2 of those relate to the COVID risks, both for the staffing and the wider public. Ultimately, we've taken those out because we believe they don't meet the bar to be a strategic risk to the Council anymore, and they would be covered under our operational emergency planning and staffing risk. What I would say is ultimately, if that situation does change, we would look to reintroduce them. I hope it doesn't, but I just sort of want to make it clear that obviously we've had some sort of passionate discussion about this in this committee, so it's not a case of it's gone forever. If it does have to be reintroduced, we're happy to do that. Equally, the HGV driver shortage risk gone, but I believe we discussed that at the last meeting as to why we were removing that. So the 2 I'd just like to discuss on top of that are the nutrient neutrality one. So we've made this as a separate risk to our local plan. Ultimately, that's because of the timescales we're looking at nutrient neutrality and how long it will be a barrier or a blocker to the Council compared to the amount of time the local plan would run. Ultimately, if we get to a point where there's going to be a clear impact on delivering that local plan, I'm happy to merge those. But at the moment, we're looking at one of them being sort of a 12 to 24 month issue, and one of them obviously can run a lot longer than that. The only other one which might be of interest to this committee is cybersecurity. So Ovian Scrutiny, I believe, are having a presentation from IT in September around cybersecurity. I'm obviously happy if we want to extend that invite for them to come to governance and audit just on the basis of the cyber incident, and as well based on the fact that it's a long-term strategic risk, so it might be of interest to the committee to hear that as well. But ultimately, I'll leave that up to you. I'm obviously happy to take any questions on the register that anyone has.
Thank you very much. Members, David, and then Robert.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a number, if you don't mind. They're fairly minor, but first of all, on paragraph 1.2, GOLD is an acronym I'm not familiar with. What does GOLD stand for?
Oh, you need to turn your microphone off so that he can turn this on. There we go.
So GOLD was on the strategic response teams in relation to COVID. So that would have looked at the register previously, but that's subsequently been disbanded, I believe. So now it would just be looked at by CMT. But yeah, I'm aware it's not an acronym, but I probably should have explained it better.
So on page 17, the top of page 17, it's the bottom of the paragraph 1.8. Should the date be June 22 there? It says February 22.
So that was when it previously came. So that was the stuff as of February. The error there almost is that the next box should say June. So
page 20, I think, on there. Yeah, so in the risk around increased demand for housing services, just thinking now in terms of triggers, should the pressure due to rising cost of living, higher costs, leading to a squeeze on incomes be identified as a potential trigger? And then in the target date column, which is to meet the target score of 8 by the 1st of April, doesn't seem to be a lot of indication in there that there is a strategy for meeting that target date.
So in terms of the housing risk, I think I previously spoke about it, and it's something which we will need to do for September. We do need to reshape the wording around that risk, because at the moment we're talking about the Homelessness Reduction Act 2017. Whereas, so that basically increased the amount of demand which would be on councils based on the number of people who can receive advice from us. So ultimately it is about volumes, but that perhaps needs to be expanded to discuss stuff such as the knock-on impact of COVID and the cost of living. In terms of that target date, so we do have an action plan underneath it, which in theory should lead towards reaching that target. But I am aware that one of the impacts on that is that there are significant external factors which are impacting demand at the moment. So we would likely have to review that next year as to what the level of demands are, as to when an appropriate target date would be. This one at the moment is we've rolled it over from last year on the basis it is still a strategic risk, and we're seeing it as something which is probably going to be medium to long term in terms of the impact on the council. But broadly speaking, I do agree that that risk does need to be reshaped.
Page 21, nutrient neutrality. Again, in terms of potential consequences, then it depends on how long it goes on for, but there is a potential consequence on new homes bonus. And I know in the audit report, you've kind of taken out presumptions around income from new homes bonus, but potentially council tax. You know, the longer this goes on, the fewer houses that are going to be built, the impact there might be on the council tax income. Page 23. Yeah, again, in terms of triggers, it's whether the cost of living pressures are going to have an impact on people's disposable incomes. And again, I guess a propensity to renew membership of leisure centres. It's just an issue that might crop up. Page 25, which is the local plan risk. In the description, it does reference back to the local development scheme, which has been through cabinet and been approved. Yet the target dates on the bottom of page 25 don't accord with the local development scheme dates. So for example, the final one there, consult on call for sites and processing of responses, according to the local development scheme, that should be completed in Q1, 22-23. Whereas it says 22-23 there. So I think some of those dates just need cross-checking with the agreed local development scheme. Page 30, it's just a typo, I think. In triggers, it refers to the levelling up and recovery white paper. It's actually the levelling up and regeneration bill. And finally, you'll be pleased to page 31, which is the GDPR. It references there in the latest note section that work is currently on track to ensure that the early 2022 target date is met. Well, we're beyond early 2022 now, aren't we? So the question is, has it been achieved or not?
So thanks for your questions and points, Mr. Fowler. I agree with the stuff on the local plan. I'll look to ensure that meets the schedule. And equally, your comments on the emerging government policy around the white paper. In terms of leisure, what I'd say is that the levels we're currently looking at are fairly similar to pre-COVID levels, which we've seen and is reported under the performance report, which goes to OSC. I'm happy to include that more in this risk, so that's clearer moving forward. But whilst I appreciate there is obviously going to be a cost of living impact on that, we're not seeing that much of a drop off compared to pre-COVID levels at the moment. In terms of GDPR, I agree it's no longer early 2022. I believe there's a paper coming to this committee next month in July, which would identify some of the things in that risk and would potentially make changes which would lower it. So that's why that's there. I believe your other points will note, and I have to make those changes.
Just on that, you say there's a paper on the GDPR coming to July. I don't have it explicitly on the forward plan.
I'll double check that, Chair. It's not my paper, but I've been made aware there is a paper coming. I will double check that is coming next month.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, hopefully, I've been told.
Okay, Julie, we probably need to have a chat about that. So that's right. Great. Okay, thank you. Robert.
Thank you, Chairman. I would imagine that inflation and its effect on interest rates ought to be monitored as a specific strategic risk. I don't know if you have any comment on that, but it can have a major impact on our forward planning.
So I believe that would probably be captured under our medium-term financial plan risk, but I will discuss that with finance as to whether we have to make that clearer in the note moving forward. But that would be where I would see that sitting personally.
Alison, I saw you nodding. Do you want to come in on that?
Yes, I agree with Ryan. We'll pick that up through the medium-term financial plan, and it will be reported through Cabinet, through our quarterly financial report as well, because you're absolutely right. That's going to be a key risk this year.
Any other members? Yeah, I'm going to take Councillor Jeremy and then Councillor Burt.
Thank you, Chairman. Just got a couple. Firstly, on housing, I've had an issue in my ward in the last couple of weeks where the Housing Association is selling on the open market a property. It used to be the case that local members were consulted whenever that happened to make sure that, you know, if the housing stock is decreasing, you know, we were consulted in agreement. That hasn't happened, so I assume that that sort of safeguard, if you like, has been removed. And it just concerned me a little bit because obviously we're going to lose a property, which has an impact on the council, but also we've got no control over where the proceeds from that sale go. And I've made my views known to the Housing Association. But I just wondered if it is actually genuinely the case now that as a district council, we are not consulted on the freehold sale of Housing Association properties.
Unfortunately, Councillor, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll speak to housing and get your response on that.
Thank you. My second point is about leisure. Certainly in the case of Thetford, for about 3 months now, the ticket barrier machine at the front of the leisure centre has not been working, which is quite a concern because you guys need to monitor usage, and particularly as we emerge from COVID, to be able to benchmark against previous use. I'm not sure, obviously, about Derham, but I wonder how we're monitoring usage if there's no control system at all in terms of people accessing the leisure centre in Thetford. You can just go straight in. So that would impact the figures. But also it talks about the services provided. I wonder if we are comparing services delivered now versus services delivered in the past. The reason I ask that is because there are still a significant number of services that have not resumed. So, for example, you used to be able to go swimming 9 till 10 every night. It's still closure. The whole centre closes at 9. You used to be able to swim at various times. Well, you can't swim at all now on a Monday and a Thursday, lane swimming. And the consequence of that is you have 10 people per lane every Tuesday, Wednesday and Friday nights, which actually is putting people off. So if we're only tracking numbers, one, I'm not sure if we're getting the numbers right, because when I go swimming, you just walk straight in. But also the services are not the same as like for like. And I just wonder if we're aware of that and tracking the data accurately.
So in terms of the ticket barrier and the participation thing, I will follow that up because I also wasn't aware of that. And ultimately we do report that as well to OSC. So I need to ensure those numbers are accurate. In terms of the sort of, I guess, pre-COVID service to the post-COVID service, I can pass those comments on to the leisure team, but my understanding would be we are just recording participation based on what's available essentially, but I will pass those comments on.
Thank you. I've given them a bit of time to get the barrier fixed and they haven't, so I thought it's time I bring it up. And lastly, the point is around sickness. I was obviously interested in sickness levels for sort of refuse collection and that sort of thing. Do we monitor specific COVID levels of sickness or standard colds and flus? I'd imagine in some services they have sickness based on the role, sort of lugging wheelie bins around and sort of touching stuff, and you get colds and flu more often. Is there a breakdown between COVID and standard illnesses, shall we say?
So I believe with those services which are covered by our HR team, there would be a breakdown in terms of COVID, non-COVID. In terms of stuff specifically like waste, because it's contracted service, I wouldn't know if there's a breakdown. I can follow that up if you'd like and get your response on that as well.
Just on that, Councillor Jeremy, to what end would we be wanting to have that information?
I think if we're comparing levels of sickness at the moment, I would be interested to see if it's actually fairly stable, because my view is that we're being told that there's an issue with the service due to sickness. Is that a new level of sickness or is that historic, those levels? Because if it is historic, then really we should be putting measures in place to deal with it. We're constantly dealing with levels of sickness. If it's all COVID related, then that's fair enough because that's where we're at. But I suspect an awful lot of it is routine levels of sickness.
Okay, thank you for that. Members, any other comments? Councillor Burt.
Thank you, Chairman. There's a few which have been dealt with already on my list. Councillor Clive mentioned the inflation measure, which I think I'm completely with you on that. I think we really should be addressing that as a separate measure of risk. I've got a little bit of a list. I'll pick a few things if that's all right. So we've previously discussed the confusion around the grid numbers that we're given, because we're given it's a something times something, and I've suggested that we use the normal maths convention of X comma Y, where X is likelihood and Y is impact, and that's what you've done throughout the report as far as I can see. But on page 36 in the definitions, we've actually specified what we do. It's the wrong way round. It's probably a typo, but yeah, it adds to the confusion, I think. Now, I know you picked up about COVID, and then page 17, you've said that risk has been removed. I'd like are we sure that we have correctly removed that risk and we haven't done so too early? ONS data clearly indicates that we're entering another wave of COVID. That's the infections with Omicron BA4 and BA5. Hospital admissions are on the rise, and there must be a risk of absence. And that is seen with one of our providers, Serco, who responsible for the bins. Now, I'd like some reassurance, perhaps that we weren't too soon in actually removing that as a risk, and that perhaps we might have been better off just keeping that on the risk register, watching it go down to a low likelihood over perhaps 6, 9, 12 months before we actually removed it off the list. Got a couple of others, but whether you can comment on that.
Thank you. So I'll pick up page 36. The reason it's like that is because we've taken that out of the risk policy, so that's why it was that way around. I will change that ahead of the next committee. Apologies, Councillor. In terms of COVID, as I've said, it is still being monitored under our operational staff sickness risk. So there is still monitoring around staff absences, whether we can have the correct number of staff for the correct number of jobs. So there is monitoring of it. As I've said, and I appreciate your comment around the next wave. If we did get to a point where there was going to be a specific issue, I'm happy to reintroduce it as a strategic risk. But at the moment, I'm personally comfortable that at an operational level, we're dealing with that and monitoring it.
Thank you. I appreciated that we were doing it internally. It's just, I think, following on from Councillor Jeremy's, are we doing this with our external providers such as Serco? I think that's possibly where where my focus of risk might lie at the moment. Could I go? Is that the battery running flat? Because that all flashed. Oh. Could I go to page 24 on the sustainability strategy? I'm slightly worried that we're stuck in a copy and paste mode here, with sitting there on a 3x3 in our risk register. And this is so you've seen that we've put in the list of things that we've done one-off pump priming, but that was some time ago, and we keep putting this in the list to say, this is our success as well. But surely we're getting to the point now where we want to actually see that funding either draw more funding in or objectively increase our carbon reductions, rather than just coming back each time and saying, yep, that was done, we put in that pump priming, because time is going on and we are getting towards our limit time of net zero. And I also question your first vulnerability factor is technology. You've listed that as technology in there, and I'm unconvinced that that's true, because I believe the technology exists already now to be able to achieve net zero. We can move over all of our requirements to electrical requirements and provide that by renewable energy. The only issue is it's very expensive. So it's not so much the technology, it's more the cost.
So I'm happy to look at that again. What I would say on the sustainability strategy is ultimately it is until 2035, which is why there's not that much movement on the risk. That's ultimately that's when we say we'd like to deliver it, and that's what the corporate plan says. And ultimately, because of that, that's how we would categorize it as a strategic risk. But I do agree that some of those controls have been on there for a while, so I will seek to get a more substantial update for the September risk register.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it just to one more. So page 26, critical breach of ICT. I mean, you've already discussed this, and that's coming to OSC later. It struck me, and I'd like you to talk to me about the rationale really between the score of 4 times 3, because I think my feeling is that this is highlighting a weakness in our risk assessment scheme. Because, I mean, for example, if we had an incident such as the Red Car and Cleveland Council ransomware attack a couple of years ago, that was originally assessed to cost the council £10.4 million to put right. I mean, actually, they successfully managed to reduce that to £8.7 million. But that is a huge and massive cost with huge implications to the council. If you ended up in that scenario, you know, that's definitely in our red region. Something like that, or worse, could happen. So that would put us into that level 5 level. But hopefully it's low on the risk side of things. So you're looking at high impact, but hopefully low likelihood as one type of instance. But we're seeing quite a number of small scale data losses that do happen relatively regularly, and they're all, you know, the likelihood is high, but hopefully with a lower impact. So we're seeing things spread across our risk register, and yet we only pick 1 point. So I'm just wondering, how do we show the differences in magnitude of those risks across different scenarios?
So I mean, to speak specifically on the side one, the reason it's placed there by and large is based on the finances which are related to, and you know, that can go massive, that can be very small, based on the type of attack, based on the type of system access someone's able to get. That's broadly, the one on here is broadly related to our insurance and what the impact of that would be. I do appreciate your point around there are, you know, a variation in terms of how serious attack, I mean, all attacks are serious, if I'm honest, but there is a variation in terms of the impact that some of these attacks can have. I'm happy to look at it again and perhaps try and find a way which we can highlight both the small scale and the large ones. I believe that would probably be captured under, you know, obviously we have GDPR breach and we obviously have cybersecurity. They're quite related, but they're slightly different. But I'm happy to try and find a happy medium on that, because I do appreciate there can be large variance in that risk. But broadly speaking, we put it at that there based on various external and internal factors as to how we scored that. But I do appreciate your comments on that.
I think the wording of the risk is critical breach. So I think that if we use that as the driving identifier, then be interested to see what we get back from that. I have no other members of the committee who have indicated a wish to speak. The recommendation is to note the report. I will just say one thing. The issue of an operation and operational and strategic risks is one that we've discussed many times in this committee. And I'm happy that COVID has gone to being an operational rather than a strategic risk. But obviously, if it is escalated, then it comes back here as a strategic risk. So I think I'm happy that we're in the right place, because we don't do operational risks in this committee. That's not part of our remit. That's what we have the executive for. So members, are you happy to note the report? Thank you very much. Okay, so we now move on to item 8, the internal audit year-end progress report. And we have with us again, Faye Hayward. Very welcome, Faye. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. This is the first of 2 reports from me today, and the internal audit year-end progress report is intended to provide you with all of the executive summaries of the work that we've been able to finalise in the last period of the year. At section 2.1 on page 40, I just want to highlight that we've deferred the Office 365 and email and calendar management audit to early this year in 22-23. So you'll see the results of that coming through from September onwards. And thankfully, I'm happy to sit here and say to you that we did manage to complete the plan. It was touch and go throughout the year. We were playing catch up from the previous year, but all of the work that we intended to do is now complete. So at 4.4, I can show you the reports that are included within this paper. We've got a total of 6 there, and the majority of them are a positive assurance grading. There is 1 there for private sector housing DFGs, which has received a limited assurance grading. We can talk about that in a bit more detail as we go through the report. I reference a couple of position statements and the results of those, one for digital strategy and legal services. Those reports are more advisory in nature, and we use our expertise to come up with practical management actions that can be taken forward. Section 4.10 covers the ARP audits, and then you'll see at Appendix 1 on page 44 the entire plan from 21-22 with the results and the number of recommendations that have been raised against each. So moving on to Appendix 2, this is where you get on page 46, you get the high level executive summary for each of those areas that we've been able to conclude. And if you head down to the limited assurance grading for the DFG report, which starts on page 59, you may remember that at the start of the year, we chose to split this piece of work into two. So we had original position statement where we worked with the team to try and establish what the control framework looked like and see if we could indicate any early recommendations and action points that they could action. It's clear that progress has been made, but it's still not quite where we would expect it to be. So as a result, we have raised 9 recommendations there, important ones. And those are due to be completed by September of this year. So as would be the case with any of these audit reports, we'll provide you with the follow-up report, which shows whether it's outstanding or not. And any that are recorded as complete, we will request evidence to show that they are now concluded. I'm happy to take your questions if you have any on the executive summaries. Thank you.
And I just say for members, for anybody who's not familiar with the acronyms, that DFG is Disabled Facilities Grant. Members, over to you. Any comments or questions? Okay, well, we are going to be moving on to the annual internal audit opinion as the next item, Faye. So in the absence of any questions on this, we are asked to note the report. Members happy that we've noted the final quarter? Thank you. Okay, so that takes us on to item 9. So this is the annual internal audit opinion 21-22. So back with you, Faye.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the prior report gives you the executive summaries, and then this annual internal audit opinion for 21-22 summarises all of the work. It looks at the governance, risk management and control framework overall. It also evaluates our performance as a service. And we've included this time, rather than a separate report, and I have to keep presenting items to you, we've included the follow-up section within this time, just to be a bit more efficient, hopefully. Now, it's quite a lengthy report, so I just pick up on the main points for you. 2.2 outlines the opinion and why we've made that opinion. We have given the overall framework of reasonable, which is a positive assurance. We talk about some of those substantial assurance opinions that we've been able to give in the year, which are very positive. We do recommend that the findings from the DFG Disabled Facilities Grant Report are highlighted within the Council's annual governance statement until they're complete. So we have outlined that there. 3.3 goes into all of the work. And then at section 3.4 on page 74, I would like to let the committee know that due to the hard work of executive management and operational management, and also the help of this committee, we're reporting that 3 low priority recommendations are outstanding at year end. That's the best result across the consortium in Norfolk. So I think that needs to be a very positive point for officers and members, that we take internal audit recommendations very seriously here and we close them down quickly and in good time. The annual review of the effectiveness of internal audit talks about our internal assessment process, and then we highlight the KPIs for the contract. I've been very transparent in 5.2.2 about some of the performance issues that we've had over the course of the year. We have managed to complete the plan, and I've got a set of actions to take forward so that we're not in this position going forward. After that, on page 79, you'll see a number of appendices which just kind of give the information within the report in a different way, a bit more graphically, and then the limitations and responsibility statement is at appendix 5. Again, happy to take your questions about the content. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Faye. Members, once again, over to you. Any comments? David.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Faye. Just trying to understand how we, at a glance, understand the progress that's going to be made against dealing with the recommendations. So appendix 1 on page 79. If you take the environmental services waste management audit area, so there are 5 recommendations. 3 are important and 2 need attention, which is a 3-month time frame. So I'm trying to understand where it says not yet due, when would they be due then, if it's a 3 month time frame for dealing with that issue?
Turn your microphone off, David. You can respond. That's right.
The 3-month and 6-month timeframes are there as a guide. So we may actually be in a situation where they're slightly longer than that. So we need to factor in when practically management can get on top of those. In terms of the assurances that I can give you, if we've given a deadline within the final report and that's not met, it will come back to you as a committee so that you can follow that. But I have no doubt that for the majority of these, given the track record that the council has in completing the recommendations, that you shouldn't see those come back. But if you do, you know, that will be on the follow-up report that we provide. That would mean that the deadline has not yet fallen due, and bear in mind that this report is slightly historical now due to paper deadlines and things, but yeah, it would mean that we've set a time frame in the future for them to complete that, and it's not yet fallen due.
Thanks, Chair. Just one more quick one. Page 85. Yeah, just looking at the response there in the housing needs area. It sounds a bit vague, I guess is what I'm saying. The housing manager will put something in place to review this. I'm just wondering whether we could sort of ask for something a little bit more specific than that. And similarly on the cybersecurity response there, implementation is due in 6 months. Whereas that response there doesn't give a lot of confidence that either the person who's written that doesn't think it's important enough to be done in 6 months, or they can't do it in 6 months. It's one or the other. It's just a bit of lack of clarity.
Thank you for your comments. I will feed those back to the responsible officers for those, but I think it's worth bearing in mind that these are lower priority recommendations. They are needs attention, but having said that, you know, we need to put effort into making sure that the response is adequate and needs to be clear what the team intend to do about it. So for the next time, if they're not complete, I will ensure that we have a bit more clarity on those points. Thank you.
Any other member? Councillor Jeremy.
Thank you, Jen. It's just a point on the disabled facilities grant, because it wasn't too long ago that there was quite significant delays in people receiving that support, primarily because of shortages of the occupational therapists and that side of the assessment. And certainly my experience of late is that it's a much quicker process, and residents are being supported in a much more timely manner, which I think is a real improvement. The bit I read with interest was I think it's a suggestion, apologies if it already happens, but the idea of a client satisfaction survey, because I think that's a really good idea. I'd be keen to see it split out between the assessment process and also the actual physical work being undertaken, partly because we want to make sure the processes for the assessment are working well, but also as a sort of check and balance against the contractors that we use. I mean, we as the council don't see the work completed, we don't know about their health and safety and workmanship and all the rest of it. I've certainly never had any complaints about any work undertaken. People have been very happy, but it could be a very useful tool for monitoring the contractors that we use. I mean, this is quite substantial work that's being undertaken. A resident in my ward recently had a significant expensive stair lift to put in, and they were over the moon. It's life-changing for them. But for two reasons there, I think the satisfaction surveys would be a really good thing to move forward with.
That's a very good suggestion, and I will take it back to the responsible officers. Thank you for that.
Robert. Sorry, I called him Councillor Jeremy. Councillor Kybird.
Sorry. On page 82, we've got under legal services position statement. What does that mean?
Sorry, what page are you on?
Page 82.
Page 82.
Thank you. Yes. So in the earlier report for the progress report, we talk about those advisory pieces of work, and that is the position statement. That's what it's called. So rather than putting the assurance level in there, we've highlighted that we have provided assurances, but in an advisory nature.
So any further comments from members on this report? Right, okay, so on page 68 of your agenda packs, we have 4 recommendations, which I propose that we take together, and I'll just read them out. Receive and approve the contents of the annual report and opinion of the Head of Internal Audit. Note that a reasonable audit opinion is being given in relation to governance, risk management and control for the year ended the 31st of March 2022. Note that the opinions expressed together with significant matters arising from internal audit work and contained within this report should be given due consideration when developing and reviewing the Council's annual governance statement for 21-22. And item 4, note the conclusions of the review of the effectiveness of internal audit. Are members happy to agree? Anyone against? Lovely, thank you.
Chairman, could we add to that the committee note the substantial progress in dealing with the backlog of audit recommendations?
I'm happy. Do you have a seconder for that? Yeah, okay, great, thank you. All in favour? Anyone against? That's duly added as recommendation 5. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Faye. So we now move on to item 10, the annual report of the Treasury Management Service and actual prudential indicators 2021-2022. We have Cabinet Member Councillor Cowan. Councillor Cowan.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this wonderful report, of which I can honestly say it might have my name on it. I've read it, but we have two individuals sitting in front of me who know the detail far better than I. But I really want to just draw your attention, please, first of all, to the author. Matthew, sitting next to Alison there, he's recently joined us. This is, I think, the first time that this committee has enjoyed his company. I think you will find his knowledge base and his skill set particularly well suited to the work we're doing here in this council. It's been a long time coming. He's certainly found his niche and he's settled in very well. So I'm delighted to welcome him on behalf of the council to provide you with what are some might call black art figures. And you will also notice that we have 2 recommendations before you to recommend to full council, and we'll get to those after Matthew's presented his report to you. So without further ado, Matthew, would you like to weave your magic spell and explain precisely what this report is all about for our lay members on this committee? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Karen. Thank you for the kind comments as well. Just by way of introduction to the report, I'm not going to go through it line by line, but I make 3 points for members. Firstly, the cash balances at the end of March this year were over £40 million, and that was exceptional due to particularly the energy rebate grant that we received. That was over £8 million that came to us in March and has subsequently been passed on to residents. So that had a one-off impact on the cash balances available. As at this moment, the cash balances are now down to 32 million, which is a more normal level for this council. Second point, you'll notice in the report that the capital funding requirement, CFR, has now turned positive, which does mean that the council has an underlying need to borrow for capital works. Now we didn't actually borrow in the last financial year because the council does have enough free cash not to need to do that. But that's just to bring that to members' attention, because that has a significant change in the financial circumstances of the council in relation to its capital programme and how that will be able to be funded in future years. And then the third point is we got a return of 0.29% on our cash investments in the last financial year. We would expect that to rise in the new year, simply because interest rates are rising on a monthly basis at the moment. So we will expect to get a better return next year as well. So those are my 3 points, and it's welcome any questions from members.
Thank you very much indeed. Members, over to you. I will take you in a minute, Councillor Burt, but I will take any members of the committee first. David.
Thank you. It's just a point of clarification, actually, Matthew. On page 106, the final bullet points, could you just give me some explanation as to what that means?
The final bullet point, the third party that we were talking about is Brackland Bridge, where we would make loans to that company, which is a joint venture between ourselves and the land group at market rates. And the particular scheme that we're lending money for was just been slightly delayed, and therefore the loan funding wasn't needed by the company the last financial year. So those loans will be made, but it's a delay in timing. Investment income on investments was actually better than budget.
Robert Cuthbert.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 92, we have the link group updated interest rate forecast. How often do we receive those updates, and how long does it take us to do the recalculation of our future when those change?
We get those very promptly after the Bank of England makes changes to interest rates. So when the Bank of England puts rates up again last week, we got a revised forecast within a couple of days from Link, and then we'll turn that around in terms of our own internal forecasts of what we expect to get very quickly thereafter. In practice, it will always depend how much cash we've got available and how long we can actually invest our own monies for, given the calls on our own finances and the capital programme.
Thank you. I'm going to take Councillor Jeremy.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on paragraph 2.3, I think you mentioned that the council tax rebate, £150 was 8 million. I think you just mentioned in your report. So just wondered what the difference was between the current figure for investments and the end of March 2021 figures. And also, presumably a significant amount of that £8 million has now been spent. What's the deadline for us spending the remainder of that money, and what happens if we don't spend it? In terms of the other reasons why the investment was so high, the capital programme did come in slightly below budget, and therefore that's money that remains in our investment balances. And there were a handful of other grants, COVID-related grants, that we hadn't fully spent by the end of March. So those would have added to the balances as well. In terms of the deadline, I'm trying to think. I think it's in the autumn that we have to, by which we have to get all the energy rebates out, but we're well on track to achieve that. We expect not to have to return any.
Councillor Cowan has just indicated
September.
So, Councillor Cowan, did you want to come in on this point?
Yes, I can. So you're quite right, Terry. We have spent the vast majority of that money as was intended. And I think we've discussed this before in different forum. Basically, those people who are entitled to the rebate fall into principally two categories: those who pay by direct debit, council tax, and those who don't. So those who paid by direct debit were managed very quickly through the system. Those who didn't, or decided to take up direct debits as a result of the introduction of the scheme, we're following on behind. And whilst the government requires us to spend and dispense this funding by September, we took the decision, if people had not been able to get all the details to us relating to personnel, bank details and such like in due time, we actually post that sum onto their council tax account as a credit, so that it would effectively be paid as quickly as possible thereafter. Just what's going to happen to the next round, we don't know, because I think that's still in the realms of central government somewhere as to how that's going to be managed. But rest assured, people who are entitled to that £150 have already received it, and those who are entitled to it but have not yet completed the forms necessarily as they ought will have a credit to their account.
Thank you. Councillor Burt.
Thank you, Chairman. Two points, if I may. So I briefly touched at Cabinet on this issue. It's entirely understandable that we didn't spend our full capital expenditure with the COVID and those restrictions. And we're now carrying that money forward. So we're looking at £2 million of funding carrying forward. But with inflation to hit 11% as predicted now, the real value of that money that we're carrying forward will be less. And what's going to be the impact on those capital projects? What sort of risk are we at, especially if we're now in a position where we actually have to borrow money and borrowing costs are going up as well?
To address the second point first, in terms of borrowing, we're not allowed to borrow in advance of need. I mean, clearly we could have borrowed at very low rates, but the council actually had no need to borrow, and therefore we're not allowed to do that. And the first point around inflation and its impact on the capital programme will be reported through to Cabinet in the regular reports that they receive, and it will really depend on where we're procuring tractors. It will depend on how successful that procurement is. Officers will be very minded to try and keep value for money on capital expenditure.
Yes, this isn't a procurement committee. We're just looking at the figures. So that will be a problem for elsewhere.
Yes, Chair. I was just thinking of the risk side of things, which wasn't something we were looking at. Second point, page 92, which I think Councillor Kybert had already alluded to. I was looking at so page 92, the interest rates. There seems to be a little bit of a mismatch between the link group updates, which carry forward to 2025, and the comparison with the Public Works Loan Board. Now, I appreciate the summary on page 94. It seems very reasonable summary, and they've indicated that they don't expect interest rates, to go to 2.5% because of the consequences it said. But that doesn't necessarily match up with what the Public Works Loan Board is doing for its long term. So it appears to be a slight mismatch in there between what Link are predicting and what Public Works Loan Board is doing. So my query is to do with how confident are we in the figures that we are being presented with. Now, as a scientist engineer, I always like to see a confidence interval, and I very rarely get that in these figures, but because we need that to know where our risks lie and what we've got to take into account. So how confident are we that those forecasts that we've been provided with will come to fruition?
I think, I mean, the PWRB rates are set by the government in order to, the drivers of that are slightly different from the interest, the bank rate that's been forecast by Link, I would say that. I think in previous reports, Link have provided an alternative view of interest rates from, I think, a firm called Capital Economics. So I'll make sure that they provide that as well, because there's always get three economists in a room, and you'll always get a different
view of what the future is going to be. So as we do rely on Lincoln, and they are professional advisors, and they have a specific group set up that reviews their forecasts. So we are confident in them, but they themselves will always are prepared to provide an alternative view. They'll say no, it isn't an exact science. But I'll make sure that alternative view comes to the committee as well, so that people are aware of that.
So I think the point here is that it's an opinion, so it's not fact. But your point is, how confident can we be in their opinion? And the answer is, well as anybody, I suppose, given that we pay for their opinion, and they're an industry standard, as it were. Now, only time will tell how accurate they are. But I suppose the point that the officer's making here is that it is reasonable to look at their opinion, given their expertise and position in the market.
Absolutely, Chairman. I'm not doubting that in any way. And
but I don't think we could put a number on it, Councillor.
No. Some sort of point. It's just that it is changed by quite a bit, quite quickly, and yet we're looking for a very long-term protection. So it would be nice to be able to, thank you very much to giving us some additional information from other sources. That would be, I think, very valuable.
Any other members? Any other points? No, lovely. Thank you very much for that. So let's have a look at the recommendations. There are two on page 87 of the papers. Okay, so these are recommendations to full council. So our recommendation is to recommend them to full council. And that is to approve the actual 2021-2022 prudential indicators within this report, and to note the Treasury Management Annual Report for 2021-22 at Appendix B and Appendix C. All in favour, please show. Anyone against? No. So that we recommend to council that they approve those. Okay, so that takes us on to item 11, training, which is a standing item. Do we have anything in that anybody wants to? Councillor Kybert.
Chairman, we do have a new member who's not present today, but Robert Hambridge, and yes. So I don't know whether there's a specific training session for new members, or whether that we should have something that's open to councillors generally. I think mentioned to me this morning that whilst there was induction training, once you've been a councillor for a couple of years, a refresh and with a better understanding of what this committee does might be useful.
Thank you. I think that's a very good point, Councillor Kybert, and I'm also very keen that that is offered to all members. So it would be interesting, I think, if we could commission some training, which any existing members of the committee could attend, but would be available to all members, because I think anything that increases members' understanding of the financial mechanisms of the council would be a good thing. So I tell you what, could we leave that with the officers to? Yes, of course.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some other member training in the form of online, do it in your own pace kind of stuff on data protection, etc. So it doesn't have to be an in-person session necessarily. It could be a digital provided service.
Okay. Well, I think and I'm turning here to Alison, if you would like to recommend some training for our new member, and then we'll make that offer to all members. Yeah. Okay, are you happy with that, Robert? Anything else on training? Councillor Bird.
If the training is being extended to all members, would it be possible to also extend it to those that attend regularly?
No, I mean, when I say all members, I mean all members of the council. So that would include.
Yeah, sorry, I thought you said all members of the committee.
No,
I'm sorry.
All members of the council. So yes, you are included. Okay, so item 12 is the work programme. And there was an item I understood coming that wasn't on the work programme, is that correct? Is there anything else when we look forward at the work plan, because we've got here it up to February 2023, that members would like to see added or deleted? And is there, as we have a plethora of officers here, which is always a joy, is there anything that you'd like to draw members' attention to that you would like to place in the work plan? No? Okay, so with that added item, are you happy to agree the work programme as proposed? All in favour? Thank you. And I think that brings us to the end of the meeting. The final item is to note the arrangements for the next meeting, which will be on Thursday, the 28th of July, here in this room. Thank you all for your attendance, and I hereby, sorry.
As regards the forward timetable, we've still got 2 items of date to be confirmed, which is the planning register and standards review. I would hope that by the next meeting we can have some dates for those.
So that's a formal request from the committee that we would have dates for those by the next one. That's perfectly reasonable.